Do you recognise this new terrain, and how are you? Could you say something about how you're responding to it?
Well, thank you, Nicholas. Yes, it is a complex terrain, a fast-changing terrain. Voice of America has 43 language services, and I sometimes tell people we have 43 market strategies. We really have no option but to be very flexible and very adaptable, and they range from kind of our traditional model since 1942, where perhaps we're trying to broadcast to what we call a denied area, a country where the government doesn't want us reaching its public, but where our government has decided we do wish to reach them. And we still do a good bit of that. I guess most notably, we broadcast on satellite television in Farsi to Iran, and our most recent numbers tell us that 1 in 5 Iranian adults watches our television show at least once a week. So that's quite a lot of impact in a place where the government doesn't want us, and in fact pays us the compliment, backhanded compliment of trying to jam our broadcasts, not terribly successfully. So we go all the way from that to whatever works. In Latin America, recently, we have been going basically what I would call an affiliate strategy and a Washington bureau strategy. We've been going to television and radio stations around Latin America and saying, "You got anybody in Washington? No? We can help you with that." And we are now doing a lot of reporting on Latin American television and radio stations, telling, as cut-ins, if you will, as the Washington reporter on the air in the context of a broadcast that's being aired from Bogota or Cartagena or somewhere. So it's all, no one model fits any one country, and we're trying all sorts of different things in different places. We are still using shortwave radio where it works. It's the best way to reach people in North Korea and in Zimbabwe and quite a few other places in the world. But it is fast declining as the best way to reach people in a number of other parts of the world. So we're on satellite television, we're on FM radio, we're on medium wave radio, we're on the internet, we're on Facebook, we're on Skype, we're on Twitter, big time. We reach approximately 134 million people a week globally. And we are, I think, probably the cheapest date in national security that the United States has. We reach more people with something. Now, what do we reach them with? That depends. In some cases, it is what you might call a traditional newscast. And as Nick said, we have a charter which tells us that the Congress passed that the VOA will serve as a consistently reliable and authoritative source of news. VOA will be accurate, objective, and comprehensive, and that is what we stand for. That's what we try to do. Good old-fashioned journalistic values. I spent 32 years as a journalist, and I'm very comfortable with those values, and I think they need to be refreshed from time to time. It's exactly where we need to be in terms of our news broadcasts. But we do all kinds of other things, too. One, we use whatever media there are. We're trying to reach people on any platform that human beings are using to communicate with each other. And these little videos that Jessica does are out on the internet, and they go viral in China. She's had 14 million hits in the last year. And they also are on our daily 2-hour satellite TV broadcast to China in Mandarin. So, we're reaching new audiences, and one of the things we do at VOA is teach English. And what Jessica specializes in is sort of young American slang, and it's very popular in China. Also, the Chinese censors don't censor it. They let it go through. So we're on everybody else's websites. We've been passed around, and we don't get filtered out. So it's a way of reaching the audience with something that says VOA on it and says American English. And it's a way of, if you will, engaging the Chinese public with what we've got to offer.
You're being relevant, and you're being passed along. You're breaking into a loop, right? A closed loop of Chinese young people and providing something that's relevant to them and being part of their lives. And I think that's a tremendous thing.
That's right. Maybe I should stop there and bring up the others.
Rajesh, how do you think this relates to the BBC? And what do you recognise of this in what the BBC is doing?
Sure. Well, the BBC is a very strange, very large, very widespread beast, as you probably all know. I mean, I'd quite like just to get a sense from all of you, what do you know of the BBC? If I say the BBC to you, what does it actually mean? Nothing. Anybody? Give me an idea. Sorry?
America.
Oh, this is New York, though. What?
I've always learned that it's a credible source of information and that it's trained a lot of other broadcasting stations in countries in the Arab world. I'm from Jordan, and they trained a lot of, they basically built up the national broadcasting station in Jordan. And I've heard from a lot of people that give credit to BBC for why the Jordanian national broadcast station has its journalistic values.
Okay,
So they're crazy.
so a benchmark for others, credible source of news. I didn't plant that person. Anybody else?
Well, I know the World Trust is teaching English on mobile phones in different countries. There's a lot, especially the World Trust at BBC. So much going on.
That's the World Service Trust, yeah, that's the NGO. Yeah, it's actually called BBC Media Action now. It's rebranded as BBC Media Action, renamed itself. So yeah, there's a kind of teaching aspect up there as well. Anyone else? Ideas of what does the BBC represent for you, Madam there?
For me, it's mainly that the BBC, whether it's the radio broadcast or sometimes also the television broadcasts, are largely interspersed in public media formats here. So they'll have like a BBC reporter do a particular piece, and that will be interspersed in like an NPR broadcast, or they'll have like a whole show at a particular hour. And I suspect that they would do that in other markets that are not American as well.
Well, I mean, NPR and American Public Media, NPR, have a relationship with the BBC that they buy programming, and they have a relationship with, they can use certain reports here and there. Generally on public radio in this country, you'll hear a chunk of BBC World Service as brought in by the distributor of whoever's distributing to that particular station. And on PBS here as well, you'll see every day there's World News America, which is a news program produced out of Washington, D.C. that is part of BBC World News, but aimed specifically at the American market. And in some media markets in the US, you can actually have BBC World News as a channel on your cable box. So you can have it in DC, you can't have it in LA. Don't know about New York, not in the hotel where I am. I was looking for it last night.
We can get it in LA.
On
BBC World News channel.
certain providers, yeah.
Small,
Yeah, I don't get it on the one that I have, but yeah, and full disclosure, by the way, I just finished the Masters program that Nick leads, so hopefully that's taught me something about it. So the point I'm trying to get at is that the BBC is hugely diverse, and it broadcasts in different formats to a very, very wide array of audiences. And the way we fund it is also very complicated as well. Nick mentioned the BBC World News, which is our global 24-hour news channel, is a commercial operation, whereas the BBC World Service, what you hear on NPR, is our 24-hour radio news network, news information network. It broadcasts, I think now, in 27 languages around the world. That is at the moment entirely government funded. And the BBC in the UK is funded by the licence fee, which is an amount of money, I think it's £145 at the moment, so $250, that if you have a television set and you receive broadcast, you have to pay. And that makes up the bulk of the BBC's income. And then news content, which I am a tiny cog, is funded mainly by the licence fee. And then so I will provide news content based in LA. I can travel anywhere around the hemisphere, but I can provide news content for the BBC outlets in the UK, so BBC Domestic News. I can provide it for BBC World, so our commercial operation is global. I can provide it for the World Service as well. I can be writing for our website, whether that's bbc.co.uk, which is the website available in the UK, or bbc.com, which is facing the US and non-UK markets, and that's advertising funded. So it's a very complex picture. But in terms of international broadcasting as a tool of public diplomacy. I mean, we're not in any way, shape or form told what to say. Quite the opposite. In fact, I mean, the one thing that the BBC has which sets it apart from other examples in this genre is that our editorial independence from government is enshrined in law. There's something called the Royal Charter, which was the founding document of the BBC that's renewed every 10 years, and that mandates the BBC to be editorially independent from government. It tells the government
to be fair, the reason that just because it's mandated in law doesn't mean that governments haven't attempted to subvert the charter. And you have to keep it with, and this is the same case for VOA as well, is that historically governments have tried to sway what's done. What's the situation, Emmanuel, for France 24? Are you editorially independent, or do you come under pressure to say particular things?
I would say that we are, I was working for a totally private print publication before I came here in this country 8 years ago, and I think I felt more pressure then than now. Basically because it was an influential magazine, a news magazine, weekly magazine then in France, and maybe France was not influential enough to be pressured, but I don't think it plays the same way on the international scene as it plays on the national domestic scene, in terms of influence and pressure. But just to tell you a bit about France 24 as you did, I'm not going to ask you what you know about France 24 because I'm afraid I know the answer. So we are obviously a young channel. We've been around for, it's going to be 6 years in December. We're small. We're not that powerful or influential as much as those guys are here, which might allow us to be maybe more nimble, hopefully. So we are in 3 languages only, French, English, Arabic, and we broadcast all over the world in our format that you were talking about for VOA. But for example, we have a very strong presence on the internet. We have, like, on Facebook, we have almost 1 million friends for the French channel, which is huge for French, for just the French language. So we have a very strong presence in what used to be nations or countries where France used to be influential, which meaning West Africa, North Africa. Obviously, that was not the reason why the channel was funded, so it's kind of a touchy subject for politicians. Because the idea of France 24, when it was funded 6 years ago, has been in the process of being funded for 10 or 15 years before that. And the idea was to do a CNN à la française, a French CNN. Not a VOA CNN, not a VOA à la française, but a French CNN, because French politicians used to travel around, go in the hotel, and be able to watch only CNN. They wanted to watch something else. So the idea was there was no private, private conglomerate or anything that could launch that, so the state had to do it. But that was really in terms of presented at the time in terms of soft power, in terms of ultra soft power, meaning that I don't think the intent was at any point to really be have a journalist at France 24 acting as spokesperson for the French government. It was more sophisticated than that, and not very different from what the BBC World or VOA was to achieve.
Do you see yourselves as being part of French public diplomacy?
No. No, I don't. I see myself as being a journalist. I happen to be French. Nobody can miss that. But I work for the French channel, by the way, not the English channel. But I think so. The idea of having a different voice, that's what the channel is trying to convey, is that because we are our culture, way of seeing things, way of seeing the world, way of approaching the world, etc. We might have a different voice than what you can find maybe on BBC, on CNN, and certainly on the main broadcast networks here in the US.
So what you see yourself more as cultural diplomacy?
I don't see myself as
a diplomat at all.
I don't see myself as a diplomat. at all, and as doing diplomacy. The French diplomacy, of course, interferes with my job, my work, but it would be the case for any journalist, any French journalist, any even for a private channel. That's because I'm French that when I report, I do a lot of work with at the UN, covering the UN for audience in DRC, Congo, in Ivory Coast. And I've seen by those people there who listen to me as French, and therefore not so far from the French government. So that has to be taken into context and into account when I'm trying to think about my work, my job. But if I was working for TF1, would happen, which is the big private news channel in France, would happen to be broadcast in those countries. People would see me as the voice of the French government the same way. So it's not, in that regard, I think the being state-funded or not being state-funded is really not that relevant.
Rajesh, what's your...
I just wanted to bring another point from Emmanuel. We were talking about this earlier. You made a very interesting point about when you're covering the story of Rwanda right now, about how there's more pressure on you to be absolutely down the line because you're viewed as the voice piece of the French government. I wonder if you could just expand that.
Yeah. Rwanda obviously has a very complicated relations with France since '94, and then of course even before, but especially since the genocide in Rwanda. So whenever there is something happening at the UN, when I have to cover, for example, these last few days with DRC and its relationships with Rwanda, I feel a pressure from my bosses in Paris. It's never stated that way, but that we need to do the right thing even more than for any other subject, because we are going to be looked at, our work is going to be looked at more closely than on anything else, because the Rwanda government is persuaded that the French government is not going to do the right thing on this question, and because we are perceived as the voice of the French government. So the only way for us to react to that is to do our job try to do our job even more seriously, and even a better job than we do usually. So the only pressure I would feel in that case, that's what I was trying to convey to you. It's a pressure to be even more professional and to be more approachable in a way than for any other topics.
And I think there's a link there between...
That's true for us too.
There's a link there between the BBC and British soft power as well, in that we are, as people in this room have said, the BBC is known for its credibility, its impartiality, its talent, it delivers fair and biased news. That's what many people say of the BBC around the world. And I think the fact that we do that reflects the values of British democracy, that it can withstand criticism, that the BBC, the values that the BBC's editorial independence and the way we defend this independence are ones of freedom of expression, freedom of speech, plurality of debate. And I think in terms of what the British government gets out of that, British government realises that by holding on and cherishing our independence from government, British government gets soft power out of that, because we generate soft power for the British government, and they benefit from that.
But this is part of the irony of international broadcasting, is that it can, or certainly the Western approach to international broadcasting, is that it generates more soft power the less the government actually attempts to use it as soft power. And the sort of the closer government is to broadcasting, the less effective the broadcasting can be, and the less credible the broadcasting.
Yeah, we are the national broadcaster, we're not the state broadcaster, and this is something that very important difference.
Well, the other problem that I see with the BBC, and I wonder if this is
the one,
is that, and I know the BBC has got some data on this, which they haven't necessarily been quick to share, and that's when they talk to people around the world about, do you like the BBC? People say, yes, I respect the BBC, BBC is a great source of news. But then they say, and where does the BBC come from? People aren't necessarily sure anymore. And they're not sure whether it's somewhere in the West, is it Britain, is it America? They think of it sometimes as being connected to them because it's broadcasting in their own language, or maybe. So the BBC is starting to operate almost as an international actor in its own right, almost like an NGO that happens to be broadcasting.
Yeah, except we're not pushing a particular number.
No, but then your line could be not to have a line. You see what I mean? But if you can be doing...
I think it would be more accurate to say we're operating as an international brand.
International brand.
That's the way he's trying to do it.
But when the brand becomes dissociated from Britain, when people don't see the Union Jack on the brand, you can be serving British interests without necessarily, as I say, it's in Britain's interest for the world to care about climate change, or for the world to be have sort of sympathy for pluralism and resistance to radicalisation. Those are good things for Britain, but you're not necessarily putting a Union Jack on things. I mean, is that something that you're aware of, or there's sort of a disconnect between Britain and the BBC?
I mean, we always know that we're the British Broadcasting Corporation, that's the name, so there's always a reminder in the name of where the corporation began.
Right.
Increasingly, we are broadcasting in different languages on multiple platforms. As you are, we're going where the audience is. So the World Service has closed down on the shortwave language services, but it's opened up FM services in some of those countries and television services, like, for example, BBC World News. Now we have BBC Persian, we have BBC Arabic, we have BBC Swahili, BBC Hindi. They've just started, or they're starting coming online. There are several other languages. I think, I was told recently by a colleague, we have maybe 10 different television languages. So we're trying to be all things to all people, but always with that stamp of quality. This is a BBC branded broadcast, and so you know that you'll be able to trust it.
Now, what I wanted to ask David is, what is your sense of how your relationship with your audience is changing? Because, you know, do you recognise this business of a transition from an audience who would be the sort of the tied consumer, like the person who's got the plumbing coming into their house, to what's your experience been of this changing audience, and how do you relate to your audience?
I'll give you an example of something that we're doing in Russian. You know, not long after Putin came in, he took us off of a whole series of mostly radio but some television affiliates that we had in Russia. And they had to sort of rethink, well, now what do we do? So we have very much a digital strategy. But one of the things we've done just in the last year since I've been director is we've started a program called Panelists, which means share. And it is the audience that decides what the show is about. And the audience are often part of the show. They decide by SMS and Twitter and so forth what they'd like the subjects to be covered tomorrow on the show. And we frequently have members of the audience on Skype or on the telephone participating in discussions with the experts they said they wanted us to go get for
That's
them.
a great moment.
So we don't have, it's a fairly new show, we don't have very good numbers on it yet, but it's starting to get a lot of feedback from the audience. It seems to be what young Russians want to watch. And this show is on the internet. And that's mostly where we have our audience, but we also put it up on a satellite, and we get a little bit of audience that way as well. So there's an example. On that earlier point you mentioned about you talked about the magic bullet thing.
Yes.
Just one anecdote. You know, you're right that our funders, some of our funders, don't really understand what we are, you know, and would like us to be more propaganda voice. And I can remember saying to, you know, somebody whose opinion I value, who I know supports our budget, and, you know, is a good fellow and all that, but I found myself saying to him, you know, Congressman, you know, the best answer to propaganda isn't more propaganda, it's truth. We're the truth business. And it's in our charter, it's in the law. If you want to change it, you have to change the law. By the way, we're proud of it. It works. People would much rather be told what the hell's going on and then respect them enough to let them decide what they want to think about that. And that's what the kind of journalism I wanted to do as a commercial broadcaster, and I'm very proud that that's what I think Voice of America, like the BBC and France 24, also trying to do.
But I think this business of empowering the audience is a very important model to take forward. I know it's something that the BBC was doing with, they had a strand on lunchtimes in BBC to Africa called Africa How Do You Say, where they would be asking Africans to suggest what they wanted to talk about. And the amazing thing was that new subjects were being generated by the audience that nobody at Broadcasting House would think, oh, let's do a show about suicide. But the people in Nigeria were texting in and saying, we really want to talk about suicide. And the audience took British Broadcasting to Africa into all sorts of new places. So it was a terrific, terrific model. And it ensures that you're going to be relevant to your audience if you're actually asking them, what do you want us to talk about?
But I think as the audiences fragment and they're available, or they exist and they consume media in different ways, and we all go after those different audiences on different platforms, you necessarily have to be asking your audience, what do you want from us? You want that two-way engagement with audiences. Like what Africa Have Your Say, there's World Have Your Say, which is a World Service radio programme, there's World Have Your Say, which is a television programme as well. Interactivity, I mean, you call it engagement, but it's interactivity for us, in our language as well. You have to be responsive to your audience, not only in terms of where they are and how they're consuming your output, but in actual fact what that output is.
Right, now
We have, in that order of ideas, we have something we call France 24 Observers, France 24 Observers, which is a program where basically it's crowdsourcing news and information, but it's moderated by journalists and it's curated by journalists. So the idea is to try to find a way to use crowdsourcing, but with the journalism ethics, and that's something we've been, and it works very well in Africa and a lot of places where there's conflict or even just it worked very well during the Arab Spring, and that's what helped really launch the Arab language channel for us, because people really felt empowered by that kind of programming, and not only programming, but dialogue between the journalists and the people trying to participate and give their input in the process.
How does that work?
But it's a program on TV, but it's also on the internet, and it's a constant thing. So you can have a program when you actually have people calling from via Skype or and giving testimony.
Everybody's got at least two screens going.
Yeah. So but we don't call them before we have tried to check that they really witness to what they're saying, they witnessed or that kind of thing. So that's where the journalism gets in.
Now, what I wanted to, a question that comes up from time to time, so we think about international broadcasting as a question of competition. And so I want to ask each of you, who do you see as your competition? And maybe we'll start, maybe Emmanuel, we'll start with you. Who are you competing with?
My favorite, when I'm talking about the future of France 24, still founding it, etc., what I see as a guarantee for us is when I see the Chinese coming up with a French-speaking channel for West Africa, where Al Jazeera coming up with French-speaking. So in terms of the political scene in France, our competition is clearly all the other, all the powers of the world, which are usually much bigger, much more powerful than France, but and trying to set foot in those areas of the world that used to be sort of French empire. But that's not the way I see myself. That's the way.
You think that France 24 sees itself as protecting the francophonie?
It's more, I think it's more politicians or people following us that might see us that way from time to time. It's not the way I think journalists working for the channel see themselves. The competition is the BBC for us. It's sometimes.
So that's interesting that you have two different. So your politicians have one competitor, the journalists have another.
Well, that's one of the misunderstandings. That's why I'm. That's one of the misunderstandings you were talking about. Yeah, there is.
Rajesh, who are you competing with?
Well, are you asking me as a representative of the BBC or as a hack If you're asking me as a correspondent, then it's every other correspondent out there.
Yes, you're right. Yeah, especially the ones at the BBC.
Yeah.
You might be up for those top jobs there in the offing, right?
But in terms of the BBC, I mean, we know that we have a strong brand, and we are blessed that we have big audiences who trust our brand. But we also know that there is an increasingly crowded marketplace for broadcasters, an increasingly crowded marketplace for ideas. Having studied the Master of Public Diplomacy program in the last year, I can tell you that we face what's called a paradox of plenty, which is that in this increasingly crowded marketplace for ideas, what is in short supply is attention. And the sources that are going to get your attention are the ones that have credibility. So we are competing against all these other voices out there. We're also competing against ourselves just to make sure that we every day go out and do as well as we can in order to maintain our brand and make it stronger.
David? I said there were 43 markets and 43 strategies. It depends which market you're talking about. Obviously we're in competition with CCTV and Xinhua. Various estimates say that China will spend $8 billion in the next couple of years to expand international radio and television broadcasts. They've decided soft power is important.
Right.
Our budget, the total budget of U.S. international broadcasting, which is 5 companies, VOA the largest, all under the Broadcasting Board of Governors, is $750 million. So we can't match the kinds of money that China wants to spend. RT, Russia Today, is spending a lot of money now. They have a Spanish broadcast. It depends on which market you're talking about. In Western Pakistan, in the tribal areas, I'm competing with the Taliban radio, and which is scurrilous and lies, and very, very, very sad, all the stuff going on there. We tell the truth, and we're among the few that reach that part of the world with serious objective broadcasting. One of our journalists was killed in January for doing so. In other places, there are places where we're just about the only people. In northern Mali, right now, they've closed down. The Islamist rebels have closed down all the radio stations. We've found a creative way to get short audio newscasts every 2 or 3 times a day, 3 minutes, on people's cell phones. And because the Islamists also have cell phones and don't want to close that down, we've still got an avenue to reach people. And it's just, as far as I know, just about the only way. You may have something like this, I don't know.
By the radio, yeah.
But very few people are able to know what's going on in northern Mali, what's really going on in the rest of the world. There aren't that many radios. I guess shortwave is still a good way. But these little cell phone things are very effective, we think. So in some places, our competitor is fear and ignorance.
Yeah, that's the good answer. Fear and ignorance. But some of your predecessors would not have given that answer, shall we say? Traditionally, VOA has seen itself as competing with the BBC and for an international audience.
Well, in a friendly kind of way. I mean, in December, I'm going to a Berlin meeting of the DG5, the Directors General of the 5 largest Western broadcasters, and we're friends. We break bread together.
We may have a different one by then.
Yes.
We talk about, if the BBC is very strong in a place, and we're thinking if we have resources, where to put them, we're less likely to put them somewhere.
But I think this is actually quite an important approach, and because there's so comparatively little Western broadcasting to go around.
Right.
I think the more you can get together and decide, well, let you focus on Burma, I'll focus on Indonesia, or to divide up the map rather than proceeding in an uncoordinated way or an unnecessarily competitive way. That's very encouraging. I wanted to ask each of you, you have a sense of how international broadcasting is developing, but if there was one thing that you could change about the setup that you work in, what would it be? Maybe start with Emmanuel. If you could change one thing about the setup or the scope, or what would it be? Would you want more languages, or what would you change?
I think I would like to have the channel assuming what it is, which is maybe not necessarily, because we are a small channel with maybe less money than others. This logic of niche that you were talking about, I think it should also apply to us in terms of, we're strong in West Africa. That's a great thing. And too often, for a lot of people who are talking about the channel, they see that as being, we don't want to be a channel just for Africa. I've heard stuff like that. But it's in most of those countries, in some of those countries, we are the only credible news channel, 24-hour news channel out there. So it's a great thing, and we have to be there more often. Sometimes I have to struggle to pitch stories that are targeted to an African audience exclusively, because we have only one program for everybody on the channel. We don't have on the French channel we have the same program that's going to be seen everywhere in the world at the same time.
So maybe developing a niche that was...
So I mean, assuming what we are, who we are, and who we are talking to, and that we're strong in those countries. People speak French.
Yeah.
That's great for France. That's great. That's their language, and they are still eager to speak and to have news delivered to them in that language. So we should not be ashamed of that, but on the contrary, maybe more, focusing on that more. And also in terms of the niche, we are in some cable networks like Idol One in New York City, for example, in English. And the idea is, I'm not sure it's always conceived that way by my channel, but the target here is really the kind of news junkie, the people who are interested in the world news and really want to have a different perspective on the news. And in that sense, we are an international news channel in the sense that, when you say that, usually you say a broadcast to an international audience. But we are also an international news channel in the sense that we talk mainly about international news. And a lot of people in this country here, when I go around and meet people who actually watch France 24, they usually tell me it's great because they have news that I can't see on the US networks. Like, it's the same for BBC. That's the main reason of the success of the BBC here in this country. But that's also something we should work more on. I mean, these news junkies and some people who are just interested in different views, different.
But maybe not only serving the news junkies, but also bringing more. You want to be a gateway drug, if we want to use that drug metaphor here. You want to encourage more people to be news junkies rather than the very parochial news consumption that sometimes America tends to fall into. Rajesh, what would you change?
Two things. I mean, the BBC, because it has so many different services and outlets, does a vast number of stories. I'd love it if we did even more. That's because I'm a nerd. Secondly, in terms of changing perceptions, I'd like people to be as news nerdy as I am, frankly, which is what you were saying. I mean, we reach particular audiences. I mean, you in this room are not typical audiences. Maybe for some of us you might be, but you are interested in international affairs, you're interested in public diplomacy, you're interested in news, and you spend 2 hours of an evening, coming and talking, listening to us and asking us questions, where, most people are probably at home watching The Voice or, American Idol or whatever. I'd really like it if those people would be more interested in news, because there's so much going on in the world that is so important that I want people to be as nerdy about it as I am. Which, let's face it, is probably not going to happen.
David? Well, I mean, obviously I'd like to have more money. And I make the pitch to the halls of Congress and so forth, that honestly I think we are in a really inexpensive way to reach an awful lot of people. And with a message with an American message. And it may be a simple newscast that attempts to be objective in ways that maybe locally they don't hear that much. Or it might be some programming about the United States and explaining American values. Some of our largest audience growth at VOA has occurred when there was bad news in the United States. Abu Ghraib was great for VOA. Why? Because we told the story warts and all. And people were impressed.
It's been the same historically.
Watergate wasn't bad either, you know. It was a good civics lesson that we were able to give in how the United States recognizes its own problems and deals with them and corrects them. We have pretty good correction mechanisms built into our society. So what would I like? Well, more funds. I am trying to broaden the definition of news on Voice of America and the definition of what we do. You talked about the music, the jazz that was brought to Central Europe. We have such rich musical traditions in the United States. I'm trying to bring some new television music shows and radio shows back to VOA and enrichen what we offer. We're doing some partnerships with, for example, we have one with National Geographic where we do a half-hour show every week. Basically, they have a lecture series in Washington, interesting explorers and kind of dynamic people, scientists, and we do something jointly with that. So I'm trying to broaden and enrichen what it is we offer the world on Voice of America.
Now, if I could offer, how can I put this? If I had it in my power to change a piece of legislation in the United States, is there any legislation you would like changed?
Oh, yes. In the front row here is Lynn Wilder, the communications director.
That's great.
And she could give you a very precise list, but I'll be concise and just say that first of all, there's something called the Smith-Montag.
This is where I was, I didn't want to set it up.
Which is kind of let's face it, out of date. When it was started, when there was a law, it's a law that, among many other things, some of them quite good and quite still topical, but one of the things it says is, to the VOA, thou shalt not broadcast in the United States. Well, I mean, the law's an ass, I'm sorry, but you can go to any one of our internet sites and listen to any one of our broadcasts just by clicking on it now. And there's nothing I can do to stop you, even though technically there may be a law against it. I mean, the technology has overcome this law. But now what we like is just a quiet little amendment that will allow us to do the following. When Minnesota Public Radio calls us and says, we've got a lot of Somali refugees up here. They're cold, and they miss your Somali broadcast, which 73% of Somalis listen to in Somalia. Could we please have it? And we have to say, sorry, no. And that's a pity, because with no extra cost to anyone, we could be serving that Somali community on Minnesota Public Radio.
But instead, they get to listen to the most extreme person in their community who almost certainly won't be sympathetic to the United States or objective or balanced. But this is serious, especially when you look at the ability of the BBC to move freely between domestic and international. And even in the English language, the BBC has an ability to offer valuable international perspective to America, to NPR.
The other thing is
which is a role that the VOA could.
As you said earlier, you have to now start to think about language groups without national borders.
Right.
There are 800,000 Farsi speakers in the state of California alone.
Yes.
Farsi is an international global language. It's all over the place. And we have to think about it that way. And so I think the law is out of date. I'm not asking, nor would I advocate that the U.S. government spend money for us to broadcast to the U.S., but just to make our products, to not ban them being available.
Because there's Farsi speakers in California are broadcasting back to Iran.
There are some
They're creating their own programs.
We have had this issue of domestic, international. When we were founded, you said there was a partnership, public-private, which was actually not a real one. Basically, the private companies got to have 50% of the new company founded, plus 24, and it gave nothing in exchange. But it was important for the politicians to be able to say that it was a partnership, private, public, and at the end there was going to be to have some private money. Didn't work out well, so after a few years it became more public. But in exchange of participating in that, those private companies obtained that France 24 couldn't be broadcast in France, especially on what we call the TNT, which is the terrestrial digital, which is huge in France, much bigger than in the US or in the UK. And actually, so it was a big weakness for us, because it didn't allow us to have a domestic audience, especially those people who are just interested in international audience, would be interested in what we do, which is different from what the other French news channels do. And that's also a weakness for the channel, as when we go and try to get more money, people say that nobody watches that because the constitution it's starting to change. We are more and more present on the domestic networks. And also, thanks to one interesting thing, in the Arabic channel became, last spring, became for a few weeks, it was the most viewed news channel in the country, the Arabic channel, France 24. But there was, I don't know if you remember, there was in Toulouse, this incident, this guy who took hostage, was shot by the police at the end. So it was like drag for days and days. And that event was followed closely by Arabic-speaking people living in France. And they did that through France 24, which was seen as something, people were not sure about that, because there was a lot of talk about what we call communautarism in France, or they don't watch the news in French, so then that's not be something. But my opinion on that, it was much better for them to watch the news in France 24 in Arabic, rather than maybe Al Jazeera or whatever other foreign channel. So that's also some, and that has become since then one of the reason for France 24 to be out there and to exist.
This raises one of the things that's missed is the reason for the Smith contact, and it's come to be explained as almost like exactly like the equivalent of posse comitatus, this principle that the US Army can't be deployed in the US in the same way American propaganda that's meant for overseas audiences mustn't be receivable at home, because otherwise the ruling party would have an unfair advantage in swinging American elections, and the American people cannot be exposed to propaganda. That was the argument in the 1960s and 70s when they began sort of debating the changing the Smith-Mont Act or type.
But it's so out of date.
It's so out of, it's absolutely
On
out
that
of
front
date.
too, the BBG provides a firewall. They appoint me. I'm not appointed by the president. Voice of America doesn't work. We're not the voice of the president, the current president. We're the voice of America. We're a broadcasting organization.
But what I was going to say is that the real muscle behind the Smith-Mont Act were American broadcasters.
Yes, that's right.
Particularly and news agencies, particularly the Associated Press, who really tried to close me over at one point.
I know my old employers at ABC News didn't want it ever to change either. They didn't want to have a competing broadcast. Funded by the taxpayer.
So this is, but it's difficult to see how that would apply to foreign languages, as long as an ABC or CBS are providing services in Somali. Maybe if they were, this wouldn't be an issue.
But CNN is providing other language services as well. They are commercial broadcasters providing services in other languages. Maybe there's an issue there. And it's interesting as well, BBC World Service is not available in the UK. And neither is BBC World News television channel. I don't know what the reasons are.
But it used to be that the World Service was available, it was sort of broadcast as a filler after midnight.
Yeah.
So as a teenager, that's what I would listen
Actually,
to.
BBC World News.
I would listen to the World Service.
I used to pick it up on shortwave.
Yeah, and BBC World News, the television channel, does simulcast with BBC News Channel, which is our domestic television news, 24-hour television news channel, overnight, at certain hours of the day.
But I think that one of the advantages that not having the Smith-Mont restraint has given to Britain is that there's tremendous domestic awareness within the UK about what the BBC is, what it does internationally, and ordinary British people have heard of the BBC World Service and have a level of pride in it. And the Smith-Mont Act has sort of prevented Americans from knowing.
That's one of the reasons I'd like to see it amended, because I'm not seeking to be a big U.S. broadcaster, but I would like to have a few more Americans understand this very good use of their tax dollars and how it helps the world, and how it helps the United States in the world.
Because without it, what you get is an international broadcasting that's skewed. So the one corner of US international broadcasting that has an immense local constituency, US broadcasting to Cuba, is artificially sustained for political reasons by that constituency, and nobody is outrage when parts of VOA are closed down or VOA's funding is cut. It seems very unfair.